Ferrari told the world their engine was the problem. Their own driver stood in front of the cameras and said the same thing. And this weekend, at Silverstone, that entire story is about to fall apart because the thing that actually cost Lewis Hamilton in Austria was never bolted to the back of that car. It wasn't the power unit. It wasn't the upgrade they were so proud of. It was hidden inside a single decision the team made on Saturday. The decision that made him fast. And almost nobody noticed it happen. But here's what should worry every Ferrari fan watching this weekend. Everything the team has fixed for the British Grand Prix, the new rear wing, the revised diffuser, the reworked engine, none of it actually touches the real flaw. Silverstone is going to feel like a cure. And a cure and a disguise look absolutely identical for exactly one weekend. By Sunday night, we'll finally know which one Ferrari really brought. Because the moment that reveals the truth won't happen in a corner. It'll happen in the last 100 meters of a straight, the one place nobody's looking. If you enjoy Formula One stories that go past the headlines and into what actually happened, subscribe now because this one gets stranger the deeper we go. To understand why Austria hurt so much, you have to go back just 2 weeks. Barcelona, June the 14th. Lewis Hamilton crosses the line almost 20 seconds clear of George Russell, splits the two Mercedes in the championship, and ends a personal drought that had lasted 686 days, his first Grand Prix win in red. For one night, it looked like the comeback was real. It looked like Ferrari had finally arrived. But here's the detail that gets buried under a win. Barcelona was also a punishing, high-degradation race one that pushed Ferrari onto an aggressive three-stop strategy. The exact same tactic they'd use in Austria, same aggressive philosophy, same extra pit stops. In Spain, it produced a crushing victory. 2 weeks later, it produced a collapse. That contradiction is the clue almost everyone skipped straight past. The tool didn't change. The conditions did. Hold that thought, it becomes everything when we reach Silverstone. So when the circus rolled into Spielberg for round 8, the expectation was simple. Do it again. And on Saturday, it looked like they would. Charles Leclerc put his Ferrari on the front row. Hamilton lined up third. 2 red cars, top 3 on the grid, staring down a Mercedes team that had taken pole 8 times in a row. And then Sunday happened. Hamilton got the jump on Leclerc into the first corner and moved up to second. For a handful of laps, he sat in Russell's mirrors and even traded blows with Max Verstappen, wheel-to-wheel through turns 3, 4, and 6. It was vintage stuff. And then, quietly, the car started to die underneath him. Not with a bang, with a slow, sickening fade that no amount of driving could stop. By the end, he was 5th, 26 seconds behind Russell. Leclerc was 8th, 45 seconds down, swallowed by cars he'd out-qualified by half the grid. Ferrari threw everything at it, an aggressive three-stop, a late set of softs under a virtual safety car, and none of it worked. So how does a car go from front row fast on Saturday to nearly a second a lap slow on Sunday? Hold on to that question, because the answer is the whole story. Now here's where the official version starts to crack. After the race, Hamilton was honest to the point of confusion. "I don't know why we were so slow today," he admitted. "The degradation," he said, "was much worse than anyone anticipated." And everyone reached for the easy answer: the engine. Ferrari were down on power, so Ferrari were slow. Case closed. Except that's not what the data says, because the real killer in Austria wasn't horsepower. It was the rear tires. Ferrari's medium tire was degrading at roughly twice the rate of its rivals, losing more than 1.5 seconds per lap after just 13 laps. 13 laps. On a stint that needed to last more than 20. That's not an engine problem. That's the car eating itself alive from the rear axle forward. And the reason it happened traces straight back to Saturday. Subscribe if you like technical F1 breakdowns explained in plain language, the stuff most channels skip straight past. Remember how strong Ferrari looked in qualifying? That pace didn't come from nowhere. It came from an extremely aggressive setup, a sharp, responsive front end built to rotate the car hard into the corner and squeeze every last thousandth out of a single lap. On low fuel, on fresh rubber, for one flying lap, it was devastating. But that same setup carried a hidden bill. and it came due on Sunday. Here's what it feels like from inside the cockpit. A knife-edge front end loads the rear tires far harder than they want to be loaded. On corner exit, the rears start to slip just a fraction. That slip generates heat. The heat costs grip. Less grip means more slip on the next corner exit, which makes more heat, which costs more grip. It's a snowball. And once it starts rolling, the driver can't stop it. He can only slow how fast he loses. Leclerc described it perfectly. Very low grip. The rear of the car never in its window, the tires never where he needed them. And once that snowball starts rolling, the driver has only one weapon left to go slower on purpose. Short shift early. Feather the throttle. Give up corner exit speed just to keep the rubber alive for a few more laps. Every single lap, he's fighting his own car instead of the car in front of him. Imagine leading a Grand Prix and being told the only way to reach the finish is to stop attacking. That's the corner Ferrari painted themselves into. So picture the two cars side by side on lap 30. One launches out of the corner clean and hooked up. The other is scrabbling for traction, the rear stepping out, the driver feeding the throttle in like he's walking on ice. Now would you blame the engine for that? Because that's what the paddock did. And they were looking at the wrong end of the car. But now it gets worse because there was a second problem stacked on top of the first. This is 2026, and these cars run a completely new breed of power unit. Half the performance now comes from electrical energy, a huge battery feeding a motor nearly 3 times more powerful than last year's. But there's a catch built into the rules. The old system that harvested energy from the turbo is gone. So recovering that electrical charge, especially on long straights, is far harder than it used to be. And that is exactly where Ferrari has a weakness nobody had fully seen until Austria. Listen to how Hamilton described it. Coming out of the corner, he said, "The grunt is there, the car feels strong. But at the end of the straight, ours tails off. Mercedes, they just keep going. That's not raw power. That's deployment, how long the electrical punch lasts before it runs dry. Ferrari's runs out early. Mercedes holds to the line." On Friday, Ferrari were 0.6 down on straight-line speed alone. Think of it like a phone battery you're forced to recharge while you're still using it. These cars top the battery up under braking. And by bleeding off a sliver of power right at the end of each straight, tiny sips of charge, lap after lap after lap. Get that balancing act perfect and the power never fades. Get it slightly wrong and you arrive at the next braking zone with the tank already empty. In Austria, lap after lap, Ferrari kept arriving with nothing left. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. Kimi Antonelli, the championship leader, said that at one point on track he was closing on Leclerc's Ferrari so fast he nearly hit him. 30 kilometers an hour faster. He described the red car as using energy in a strange way. When your rivals are stunned by how slow you are on the straights, that's not a bad afternoon. That's a design signature. If you're still with me this deep into the analysis, you're exactly the kind of fan this channel is built for. Subscribe, it genuinely helps. So now you've got two truths colliding inside one team. Team principal Fred Vasseur stood firm. The strategy wasn't the issue. He insisted they simply didn't have the pace of Mercedes and Verstappen. He admitted they overpushed in the opening laps chasing Mercedes, and then, in his words, paid the bill at the end. But notice what that framing quietly does. If the problem is we just weren't fast enough, that's vague. It's forgivable. It's the kind of thing a new engine can fix later. But if the problem is our own setup cooked the tires and our deployment dies on the straights, that's a much more uncomfortable admission because one of those you can bolt on. The other is baked into the car. So which one do you think Ferrari would rather you believe? And they weren't the only ones watching closely. Over in the Mercedes camp, Toto Wolff admitted he was a little surprised that Ferrari could keep throwing such massive upgrades at the car. Because while Ferrari were explaining away Austria, they were already loading the truck for Silverstone with a new low-drag rear wing, a revised diffuser, and possibly a reworked exhaust. A team that confident is either about to prove everyone wrong or about to hide something. Keep watching, because Silverstone is where we find out which. Now watch this because this is the twist the title promised you. Everything about the British Grand Prix is set up to make Ferrari look cured. And almost none of it is because Ferrari fixed the car. Start with the weather. Austria was brutal 34 degrees in the air, over 50 on the track, at altitude in the Styrian Mountains where thinner air chokes both the engine and the cooling. Silverstone this weekend? Mid-20s, cloudy, sea level. Cooler air means the tires stop overheating so fast. The Snowball takes far longer to start rolling. The single biggest weakness from Austria gets quietly muffled, not by engineering, but by the sky. Then the tires. Pirelli has gone a full step harder for Britain, the toughest compounds in the range. Harder tires resist exactly the kind of thermal degradation that destroyed Ferrari in Austria. And finally, the track itself. Silverstone isn't a straight-line power circuit. It's a cathedral of fast, flowing corners, maggots, Beckett's Chapel, the kind of high-speed sweeps where a strong chassis and clean aerodynamics matter more than deployment down a drag strip. And a strong chassis is exactly what Ferrari has. It's what won them Barcelona. But there's one more twist stacked on top of all of this. Silverstone is a sprint weekend. That means a single hour of practice before everything starts to count, no time to slowly dial the aggression back out of the setup, no long runs to learn how the tires truly behave over a stint. The teams have to nail their baseline almost blind, straight out of the simulator. For a car whose Saturday setup is the very thing that poisons its Sunday, that is a terrifyingly thin tightrope to walk. Before we get to the part that actually decides this, make sure you're subscribed. The second half of this season is going to be a war, and you'll want to be here for it. So here's the trap. Ferrari could roll into Silverstone, look quick, fight for the podium, maybe even give Hamilton a shot at a record 10th British Grand Prix win in front of his home crowd, and none of it would prove they fixed anything. Cooler track, harder tires, corner-heavy layout, a chassis that was never the problem. You could bolt the Austria engine straight back in and still look fast here. That's how much the venue flatters them. So how do you see through the disguise? You watch the one thing the track can't hide. Silverstone still has real straights, Hangar Straight, the rundown to Stowe, the Wellington Straight. And on every single one of them, the same question from Austria comes back to life. Does Ferrari's power hold to the line? Or does it tail off in the final 100 meters while a Mercedes or a McLaren sails past? That's the tell, not the lap time. The last 100 meters. If Hamilton is defending into the braking zones with the electrical energy already gone, if a rival can hang back, save charge, and slingshot him on the straight, then the truth is simple and brutal. The corners hid the flaw. But the flaw is still there. The deployment deficit was never fixed. It was just sent to a track polite enough not to mention it. And the stakes could not be higher. That fifth place in Austria dropped Hamilton to third in the championship, now around 46 points behind Antonelli. Ferrari sits second in the constructors' standings, but nearly 100 points adrift of Mercedes. In a season this tight, you don't lose championships in the corners. You lose them in the places you can't fix in a fortnight. Hamilton himself has already tried to lower the temperature. There are, in his words, no magic wands. The real deployment fix, he admitted, won't come for a while. You can't rewrite the electrical heart of a power unit between two race weekends. Which tells you everything about what Silverstone actually is. It's not the cure. It's the exam. And Ferrari are walking in hoping the examiner asks only the questions they've already learned to answer. So this weekend, don't get swept up in the lap times. Don't let a strong Saturday, or a roaring home crowd, or a podium fool you into thinking the problem is gone. Because a car can look completely healed on the right track and still be carrying the exact injury that will cost it the championship on the wrong one. Ferrari didn't fix what cost Hamilton in Austria. They drove it to a track that hides it. And Silverstone is about to tell us the truth, whether they like it or not. So what do you think? Has Ferrari genuinely turned a corner? Or are we all about to be fooled by a friendly circuit? Tell me below. And if this is the kind of Formula One breakdown you've been looking for, subscribe for more investigations, technical deep dives, and the hidden stories behind the results. This is F1 News Lab Reloaded. I'll see you at the next one.